the UPSC exam has changed and so has the world. I think the exam always mirrors the way the world works. And अगर आपको कोई भी एक month देखना है which actually highlights and encapsulates the change that I'm talking about, this interconnection in the exam that we talk about, this intermingling of sanctions with tariff, with geoeconomics, with geopolitics, with defense and science and technology, the entire thing, how a war in the Middle East, how a war that was started by the United States has an impact on the rupee valuation here, how economics and international relations and the RBI, all of it is just one closed ecosystem. And it is this closed system that the UPSC is constantly testing. 2026 के UPSC के पेपर में आया कि हॉर्मूज के स्ट्रेट से कौन सी कंट्रीज की शिप्स को निकलना पड़ता है और उसमें 4 ऑप्शंस दिए. सो व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन ज्योग्राफी एंड जियोपॉलिटिक्स और जियो इकोनॉमिक्स और इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस? द लाइंस आर ब्लरिड. फैक्ट ऑफ द मैटर इज दैट अगर ये लाइंस इतने ब्लरिड हैं तो इस सब्जेक्ट को पढ़ने का, करंट अफेयर्स को पढ़ने का, इसके स्टैटिक और डायनेमिक की जो आर्टिफिशियल लिंकेजेस हम बनाते रहते हैं अपने माइंड में, इनको पढ़ने का एक पर्सपेक्टिव अक्यूमुलेट करना होगा. दिस इज व्हाट आई एम गोइंग टू डू इन दिस वीडियो. आई विल डिस्कस the 12 most critical themes for India, for the world, for the UPSC exam, for anybody who wants to be well educated from the month of May, which highlight this point and which will add deep, rich perspective to you. I will talk about not only the keyword that might be asked for in prelims, I will talk about perspective, I will talk about arguments, I will talk about mains answers, I will talk about the central debate. I will keep the opinions aside. This will not be my opinions at all. This will be an explanation. It will be more like you reading a lot of editorials condensed in one. Think about it like that, along with the information and the prelims perspective and the main perspective. So let's get started without further ado. What really has happened? The first theme, of course, is the war and what and how the war led to tariffs and how the whole interconnection works. This is the critical main theory. This interlinkage, this event, this cascading interconnectedness, यही मेंस में पूछी जाएगी, यही प्रीलिम्स में भी पूछी जाएगी और इसी चीज की अंडरस्टैंडिंग आपको टेस्ट करनी है. So what really happened is what there was a war. The war led to an oil spike, the demand completely shot up. This led to a rupee fall. We'll discuss ये कैसे हुआ, ये क्यों हुआ, इसके पीछे factors क्या हैं, what are the cogs in the machine, what is the role of the RBI in the whole. It's very interesting, very beautiful in fact, I would say. We talk about what the RBI did. The RBI held. मई के महीने में RBI ने interest rates तोड़े नहीं. They did not fluctuate things. They did not play too much with the policy. And that was very interesting to see. We saw Quad, we saw BRICS in this time. We saw war, we saw Russian oil sanctions, we saw the removal of those sanctions. So much interesting stuff happened. मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि अगर मई 2026 ही ढंग से समझ लिया, आप आधा मेंस वैसे ही निकाल सकते हो, because you will understand the critical stuff. But let us get started in this very beautiful and very interesting. This very beautiful, very interesting conversation. The first theme is, of course, the tariff war and what India has won. What India has won, what India has lost is dependent on how you perceive it, what you have understood by it. And we will be neutral. We will be neutral from the point of view of the UPSC exam and we will stick to what the UPSC really wants. This is the central thesis, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget this. Remember this. 2026 में tariffs stopped being an economic tool. Normally, tariffs used to be an economic tool to protect your own country. This became an instrument of coercive statecraft. ये पहले कभी होता नहीं था. We will repeat this. The central thesis of this theme is that 2026 में tariffs stopped being an economic tool. It used to be a tool where countries used to try and protect their own countries tariffs लगा के, और anti tariff bodies जैसे कि GATT, जिसके बारे में मैं आपको बताऊंगा, WTO वगैरह, exactly यही चाहती हैं कि ना हो, but exactly यही हुआ और उसके एक स्टेप आगे जाकर हुआ. It became an instrument of coercive statecraft. And India's central achievement was how India absorbed or did not absorb that coercion. There were tariffs from 50% and then reduced to 18%. And yet, India refused to convert their foreign policy autonomy, our strategic autonomy of buying Russian oil, the choice, into a written binding concession. Now, here is the deal, and here is the conceptual beauty of this. अब होता क्या है कि a tariff is in textbook terms a tax on imports. It is basically a tax on imports. The classic purpose is revenue, protecting infant industries, correcting trade imbalances. 2025-26 में the purpose changed. The United States started to use it to not only manage trade but to alter another sovereign country's state foreign policy choice. Particularly, India's buying of purchase of Russian crude that started with the Ukraine crisis that Trump wanted to sort of curtail, but there might have been different designs behind it, but let's not get into it. This is the essence of geoeconomics. This is the use of economic instruments of tariffs, of sanctions, export controls, currency access, supply supply chain dominance, जो जिसको चाइना पायनियर करता है, supply chain dominance to achieve geopolitical ends that armies used to secure earlier. The deeper principle here is strategic autonomy. India's doctrine that it will not outsource its core decision to any bloc. This was the target that the Americans wanted to change. तो जब अमेरिका ने 25% पेनल्टी इंडिया के टैरिफ पे लगाई, इंडियाज रिलेशनशिप विद अ थर्ड कंट्री बिकॉज ऑफ रशिया, इट वाज इन फैक्ट प्राइसिंग इंडियाज इकोनॉमी. सो इंडिया का रिस्पॉन्स इंटरेस्टिंग था. रादर देन कैपिचुलेट आउटराइट और रिटेलिएट destructively, we started to absorb the real economic pain, and it was to the tune of $37 billion worth of exports. Why? And why was this exposure? Why were they able to leverage this power? Why were they able to actually even do this? They were able to do this because of our structural weaknesses. Structural weakness was that this $37 billion जिन items पे ये टैरिफ लगाए गए, those items were jewelry, leather, textiles. और ये exactly वो items थे, ये exactly वो industries हैं, textile, gems, leather, जो कि labor intensive हैं. The United States knew that the exports to these are important, because back home in India, we are employing a lot of people here, and that is why this tariff was a very critical, important thing, and that is why we constantly keep talking about Atmanirbhar. There is another set of very interesting questions that emerges from it. आप इंटेलिजेंटली एक क्वेश्चन पूछोगे, आप बोलोगे कि बट इंडिया का तो ज्यादातर एक्सपोर्ट सर्विसेज में होता है, गुड्स में होता ही नहीं है, तो हाउ आर दे एबल टू अप्लाई सो मच लेवरेज? बहुत अच्छा सवाल होगा वो, अगर आप वो पूछोगे तो. They were able to do that because of the employment dependence that we had on these sectors. पर इसके पीछे की एक हिस्ट्री है, बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग हिस्ट्री है. पर इसके पीछे की एक हिस्ट्री है और बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग हिस्ट्री है. 1930s में स्मूथ हॉली एक्ट 1930s में यूएस में स्मूथ हॉली एक्ट हुआ था. दिस इज समथिंग दैट यू शुड नो. ये एक ऐसा एक्ट था जिसमें यूएस ने टैरिफ्स बढ़ा दिए थे. दिस वाज एज अ रिटेलिएशन, जिसकी वजह से वर्ल्ड ट्रेड कोलैप्स हो गया. एंड माइंड यू, दिस इज बिफोर द सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर. To some extent, this move that they had done led to the politics that led to the Second World War. This led to the frustration that led to the Second World War, the fragmentation and all. Second World War हुआ, Second World War खत्म हुआ. Second World War खत्म होने के बाद या उस दौरान 1947 में GATT इम्प्लीमेंट हुआ, एग्जैक्टली यही करने के लिए कि इस टाइप की टैरिफ्स और इस टाइप की रिटेलिएशन और इतनी प्रोटेक्शनिज्म दुनिया में ना हो. GATT is the General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs. This is the precursor to the WTO. And this is exactly what the GATT did. GATT ने एक आइडिया इंट्रोड्यूस करा जिसको कहते हैं MFN, मोस्ट फेवर्ड नेशन. आइडिया बेसिकली फंडामेंटली ये बोलता है कि इफ यू आर अ मेंबर ऑफ दिस अग्रीमेंट व्हिच इज नाउ द WTO एंड MFN, यू विल नोटिस क्वेश्चन पेपर में आता भी है और यू शुड इन एनी केस नो, अगर आप इस अग्रीमेंट के या WTO के या GATT के मेंबर हो, तो इफ यू आर अ मेंबर ऑफ द WTO और द GATT, द आइडिया इज अगर आप एक कंट्री को एक बेनिफिट देते हो तो आपको सब मेंबर्स को वही बेनिफिट देना होगा. It sounds like it is a very exclusionary, most favored nation type of an exclusionary, actually special sort of an engagement, but is the exact opposite of it. ये कंट्री के बीच में डिस्क्रिमिनेशन रोकने के लिए क्रिएट करा गया था MFN, and we will talk about this further. But 1947 में GATT आया. उसके बाद we saw in 1995 the formation of the World Trade Organization, जहां पर इंस्टीट्यूशनल परमानेंस हुई. देयर वर प्रॉपर डिस्प्यूट रेजोल्यूशन सिस्टम्स. बहुत एफर्ट्स हुए ग्लोबल ट्रेड को ग्लोबलाइज कर दिया जाए, उसको फ्री कर दिया जाए. टू सम एक्सटेंट इट फेल्ड, टू अ लार्ज एक्सटेंट, वेल, इट सॉर्ट ऑफ एंडेड अप फेलिंग. We are now in an era of the weaponization of it. So we have come full circle. You will see in not only economics, but in polity, you will see in governance, you will see in the role of the government. It goes round and round in circles. So here, where we are right now, we have come full circle to tariffs being actually weaponized. Mind you, the last time it happened, it led to the politics that led to the Second World War. But let's not go there. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's remain objective and go further. So the US imposed tariffs. February 2026 में एक इंटीरियम डील हुई. February 2026 में इंटीरियम डील में tariffs were cut to 18% and the punitive 25% Russian oil penalty was removed. India was supposed to buy $500 worth of American goods, where I made a video also about it. But in any case, India had given some commitments. The interesting thing is, and this is what you should mention in your, this is what you should mention while writing answers, is that this India-US joint statement did not record any explicit commitment to stop buying Indian. The interesting thing, and that this is something you should know and also mention, is that the India-US joint statement did not record any explicit Indian commitment to stop buying Russian oil. यही हमारी autonomy का hedge है. Now, some terms that you should know and some terms that explain things that you can actually even drop in the exam. One of those is geoeconomics. This is the use of economic instruments, जैसे कि tariffs, sanctions, export controls, investment screening to achieve geopolitical objectives. This is the weaponization of interdependence, the weaponization of interdependence. Reciprocal tariffs. These are tariffs that are set to mirror the rate the country charges on your goods. This was the logic that the United States used. Reciprocal tariffs, that India is very unfair, that keep on charging us, so we should charge them back. And then, of course, they not only charged us, they actually doubled it. And it became punitive. But that's a different story. So this is what the 2025 US Liberation Day tariffs, this is how the whole tariff story started, much before the attack on Iran and all of that other cascading thing happened. Strategic autonomy. What is strategic autonomy? It is India's doctrine of preserving independent decision-making in foreign and security policy, refusing permanent alignment with any power bloc. You can take this, use and drop these words exactly like they are. Most favored nation. A core WTO principle, a concession which is given to one trading partner should be extended to all WTO members. This is basically the idea and the principle of non-discrimination. What happens if somebody asks you the difference between bound and applied tariffs? Bound and applied tariffs. A bound rate is the legal maximum that a country committed to at the WTO. This is the legal maximum. Think about it like the MRP. The applied rate is what it actually charges, which is usually lower than that. The room between them is where the policy space and the negotiation, these trade negotiations and all that we hear about actually happens. Non-tariff barrier. This is a trade restriction that is not a tax. Other ways to actually stop or to impose geoeconomic agendas or whatever the agendas are. Non-tariff barriers can be quotas, license, standards. You've heard of, containers being returned from the UAE, from the USA because they have not met standards. Sanitary rules. These are often more potent than tariffs, but they're very narrow. You can only apply them on particular shipments. Tariffs are very broad, so they can be used and weaponized accordingly. Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, CEPA, versus bilateral trade agreement. Somebody could ask you the difference. Deep trade pacts covering goods, services, and investments are CEPA. India-US deal is an interim bilateral agreement. It is not a full trade agreement yet. Issue-based balancing. Aligning with different partners on different issues rather than committing to one camp. We will come to this. Now, there are some linkages which you should know, which I will not elaborate, but I will create a document for you in which I will place all these basic background contextual things which you should know. For instance, balance of payments. हमने अभी बीच में briefly discuss करा था कि अगर हम सर्विसेज ज़्यादा एक्सपोर्ट करते हैं और गुड्स कम एक्सपोर्ट करते हैं तो गुड्स की वजह से हमारे पे लेवरेज कैसे होगी? The answer lies in balance of payments partly. Balance of payments is current account and capital account. How remittance and software service exports offset the goods trade deficit most of the times. You will know about this, and we will also realize that now recently we have heard, and the RBI is telling us, the data of the RBI is telling us कि हमारा balance account, कि हमारा balance of payments 1/3 हो गया है और in fact negative में चला गया है, which is a serious situation, but we will come to that later. Suppose there is a question in mains. How do you structure it? What do you say? You frame geoeconomics. Question आएगा sovereignty पे, question आएगा in an age of weaponized interdependence. Export diversification is a sovereignty strategy. It is not merely a trade policy. It is a sovereignty question. इस टाइप का question आ सकता है जो कि अब हम देख ही चुके हैं. How will you start? What will you do? You will say that you will talk about geoeconomics. I just told you what geoeconomics is. It is the use of economic. It is the use of economic. It is the use of economic tools like tariffs and sanctions to achieve geopolitical aims. In 2025, US moved to tie 25% penalty to India's purchase of Russian oil. Shows that tariffs are being used to coerce foreign policy choices, not balance trade. Then you talk about India's concentration of labor-intensive exports. You talk about the textiles, the gems, the jewelry, the leather sectors, and the $37 billion worth of exports and the lakhs of jobs that were exposed. Then you talk about how India absorbed the pain rather than capitulate. You talk about how it was negotiated from 50 to 18% while refusing a written oil commitment of not buying. This is called symbolic hedge. Drop this word. This validates issue-based balancing. Drop this word also. Say that dependence is the transmission mechanism of coercion. Therefore, diversification to Africa, to Asian countries, to the Gulf countries, the India-EU FTA is one step in buffering against these risks, moving up value chains. And Rupee trade settlement, this reduces the surface area for pressure. Therefore, they protect sovereignty. You should also have a counter view here. एक line में आपको लिखना चाहिए कि critics argue that India still blinked and that the oil hedge is cosmetic and that diversification is slow and it cannot replace the US markets quickly. The conclusion will be, in a fragmenting trading order, economic resilience and strategic autonomy are the same project. Diversification is the long-run insurance premium India must pay for both of them. Economic resilience, strategic autonomy. Drop these words. It is the long-run insurance premium India must pay for both. This brings us to the second theme, the war. The 2026 Iran war and the Strait of Hormuz crisis. You know already about this. It is a 21-kilometer wide, narrow passageway of water. It is the narrowest single point of failure for a fifth of the world's oil and gas. And therefore, for India's inflation, currency, and growth, it is a critical choke point also. Energy security is not just an energy ministry issue. It is the main variable behind the entire macro and security story that we are discussing. You should know about maritime choke points. I think you would have heard a lot about this already. It is a narrow, unavoidable passage. This is how you define a choke point. A narrow, unavoidable passage through which a disproportionate share of global trade must pass. The Strait of Malacca is one. Bab al-Mandeb is one. The Hormuz Strait, of course, is one. Its strategic value is asymmetric. Whoever can threaten it can impose costs that are far larger than the cost of the threat itself. This is how you define the choke point properly. The Strait of Hormuz is the most consequential of all. Roughly a quarter of all seaborne oil and a fifth of the LNG of the world has to transit from it, because the Persian Gulf has no other exit to the open ocean except the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's coastline runs alongside the entire northern length, which is why a regional war became a global energy event. Now, again, I suppose that you know this, but why was India so affected? Why was India so affected? This is, of course, the timeline: fragile ceasefire, the chain to India, closed trade, costlier crude, wider import bill, weaker rupee, imported inflation, which I will discuss about. And also at risk were the resident Indians and the remittance, which flows again. This harks back to that conversation about the balance of payments and what is the composition of dollars going in, dollars coming out, of which remittance is one side. Remittance is a huge side. The service exports are a huge side. The global imports and the global exports are a huge side. We will talk about that in a separate conversation. But you should know that इसका static link balance of payment से ही है. Now, अब हम एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी की बात तो हम कर रहे हैं. एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी, वी विल हियर अबाउट एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी मोर एंड मोर. समथिंग आई मस्ट टेल यू एंड यू शुड नोट दिस डाउन. एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी के 4 डायमेंशन होते हैं. देयर आर 4 A's ऑफ एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी. एक है अवेलेबिलिटी. इज द ऑयल देयर? जब हम ऑयल की डिस्कवरी करते हैं या हम रिस्क लेते हैं इन्वेस्टमेंट में, अभी ऑयल हैज बीन डिस्कवर्ड ऑफ द कोस्ट ऑफ अंडमान. क्वेश्चन इज द ऑयल देयर? गल्फ कंट्रीज का इस चीज पे लॉटरी ऑलरेडी लग गई थी बिकॉज of this natural resource. Is the oil there? Availability. Accessibility. Can we physically get it? There might be a lot of trapped oil, there might be a lot of trapped gas offshore, but itna deep ocean mein, can we actually even get it? So that's availability. Affordability. Can we pay the price? And acceptability. Is it environmentally or politically sustainable to get? The Hormuz crisis, so it's availability, accessibility, affordability, acceptability. The Hormuz crisis attacked accessibility and affordability immediately at once. And India's structural answer maps onto these. Now, the strategic petroleum reserves, you would have heard about this, is our availability buffer, जो कि हमारे पास कुछ ही दिन का है, but at least we have it. Supply diversification away from a single region, this is accessibility. And the long renewable energy transition is affordability and acceptability. So you should drop these words. So you should drop these words अगर ये क्वेश्चंस आते हैं तो. Some important keywords you should know. INSTC, International North-South Transport Corridor, a multimodal India-Iran-Russia route. This is via the Chabahar port, Chabahar and Bandar Abbas. We will talk about Chabahar again and again. You would have heard about it already. It is our access to Central Asia. It is our access to INSTC, International North-South Transport Corridor. It is a multimodal India-Iran-Russia route via the Chabahar port and the Bandar Abbas port. Chabahar, of course, you know, is something we've been investing in because it gives us access, bypassing Pakistan and Afghanistan to Central Asia. It is a transit time to Russia and Central Asia via the Swiss route. It cuts that transit time to Russia and Central Asia versus the Swiss route. The Chabahar port is an Iranian port, also called the Shahid Beheshti Terminal, which was developed with Indian investment. And it is India's gateway to Afghanistan and Central Asia, bypassing Pakistan. I2U2, India, Israel, UAE, US. Grouping which is focused on food, water, energy, and technology. We will talk about this minilateralism, this multilateralism again and again. You should know what I2U2 is. This is a West Asian Quad. Basically, you can think about it that way. The IMEC, India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor, rail and shipping connectivity project, which was announced in 2023 at the G20. It is a strategic alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. IMEC. IRGC you already know. The IRGC you already know. I don't need to tell you. But you should also know something which is not mentioned in the slide is Brent versus WTI. These are two benchmark crude prices. Brent is the North Sea crude price. This is the global seaborne benchmark, which is more relevant to India's import basket. And a very, very important keyword, SAGAR. This is a critical keyword. I think the question will be asked, perhaps has been asked, but most likely will again be asked in mains. Security and growth for all in the region. Security and growth for all in the region. We will talk about this when we cover Quad. This is India's Indian Ocean Doctrine, positioning it as a net security provider. Net security provider. We will talk about this separately as well. We will talk about the necklace of diamonds. So the question that was asked in 2026 in prelims this year was, ships from which of the following countries have to cross the Strait of Hormuz to reach the Indian Ocean? Of course, the answer is Bahrain and Qatar inside the Gulf. Why? Because they both sit inside the Persian Gulf. The only ocean exit is Hormuz. Syria's coast is towards the Mediterranean, so it reaches the Indian Ocean via the Suez route, via Bab el-Mandeb, not Hormuz. Egypt borders the Mediterranean and Red Sea also. They have the Bab el-Mandeb route where the Houthis are sitting, but at least that choke point has not been choked so far. So suppose a question is asked, and suppose a question is asked, and they say India's energy security is hostage to maritime choke points that it does not control. Discuss the vulnerabilities that were exposed by the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis and the structural measures available to India. इसी type of question आएगा, you can expect more or less. What do? You basically say whatever I told you. You will talk about the 4 A's. You will define what energy security is. 4 A's आप define करो उसको. Note, India's imports, you will mention that India imports the bulk of its crude. Much of it is transitioning from Hormuz. Talk about not only the oil, but also the gas, which is a single choke point. Define a choke point. I just told you how to define a choke point. Vulnerability exposed may, again, you can use the 4 A's. You can use affordability, again, link it to Hormuz, accessibility. You can use affordability, accessibility, and the 4 A's. Talk about the diaspora, talk about the 8 to 9 million Indians in the Gulf and India's top remittance source, connect it to the balance of payment, and then also talk about the connectivity to the Chabahar port. What are the structural measures available to India? Expand strategic petroleum reserves beyond our phase 1 caverns, and you will note that there has been a recent agreement with the UAE to expand SPR, strategic petroleum reserves. We will talk about that in a separate conversation, but if you are following current affairs, you would have tracked it, but it's fine. The point is, ये suggestion हमको देना चाहिए और इस पे question तो आना ही है. Second, diversify suppliers. US, Guyana, West Africa, Latin America. The head of Venezuela. The head of Venezuela was just in India, and the whole thing is about oil. It's about energy security. India is now aggressively having to do it because the weakness has been exposed. Third, accelerate the renewable transition and green hydrogen to cut import intensity. Fourth, build blue water navy capability. We'll talk about what a blue water navy is. And build IUR partnerships. Build a Quad. Deepen rupee trade settlements. We will talk about this rupee. We will talk about more of these rupee trade settlements so that our de-dollarization, जो कि एक बड़ा sensitive subject है, but important subject है, de-dollarization करना चाहती है, India भी करना चाहती है, China भी करना चाहती है, and this really is annoying to the US. So we'll talk about this in a separate conversation, but these are your four points that you should be mentioning as strategic measures. In what will you write in your conclusion? Write that choke point vulnerability cannot be eliminated. That's why a choke point is called a choke point. You can't just do away with it. You can only diversify. You can only buffer. Now, energy security is therefore a whole of government project spanning diplomacy, navy, fiscal buffers, and energy transitions. This brings us to the third theme, the rupee, the oil shock, and what happened in India. We are now centering around India, but आप देखो कि कितना ज़्यादा interconnected हैं ये themes. And this interconnectedness is what is going to get tested. I am telling you, this is how the UPSC thinks. What is the core thesis here? The core thesis is the core thesis is very interesting and very beautiful. There is something called as a trilemma. You should know the trilemma. The trilemma is this trilemma is what you should drop. अगर आपसे ये सवाल पूछ लिया आरबीआई की चैलेंज के बारे में तो आप इस ट्रायलेमा को ड्रॉप कर सकते हो. ट्रायलेमा बोलता है देयर इज एन इम्पॉसिबिलिटी. आप कोई भी सेंट्रल बैंक जिसकी इकोनॉमी ओपन है वो तीन चीजें एक साथ नहीं कर सकते. इट कैन नॉट साइमल्टेनियसली कट रेट्स. आप ग्रोथ चेस कर रहे हो, आप रेट्स को ज्यादा मैनिपुलेट नहीं कर सकते. आप अपने करेंसी को आप अपने रेट्स को कंट्रोल कर सकते हो ग्रोथ के लिए. आप करेंसी को कंट्रोल कर सकते हो. आप करेंसी को कंट्रोल कर सकते हो या आप नॉर्मली अपनी कंट्री में कैपिटल फ्री फ्लो कर सकते हो. ये तीन चीजें इम्पॉसिबल ट्रिनिटी हैं. यू कैन चूज ओनली टू. The trilemma basically says that this is called the Mundell-Fleming trilemma. Mundell-Fleming trilemma. This is called the impossible trinity. It states that you can have at most two of those things. And here is how it works. इंडिया की करेंसी हम बार बार सुनते हैं कि डिवैल्यू हो रही है. इंडिया हैज ए मैनेज्ड फ्लोट रूपी. इंडिया डज नॉट हैव अ फ्री फ्लोट, इट हैज अ मैनेज्ड फ्लोट रूपी. इसका मतलब आरबीआई रुपी को कंट्रोल करने के लिए बीच में कभी कभी इंटरवीन कर सकता है. इंडिया हैज अ मैनेज्ड फ्लोट रूपी एंड इट इज लार्जली ओपन कैपिटल फ्लोज. जो हम सुनते हैं कि FIIs, फॉरेन इंस्टीट्यूशनल इन्वेस्टर्स आर withdrawing money and all that, they can come, they can go. So that capital flow has been basically kept open. And it finds its monetary interdependence constrained whenever global equations turn. So if rates are cut while the world's rates are high and the rupee is falling, capital will flee. That is the problem. You can't have all three together. The second problem, and this is also very important, you should know this, is what type of inflation affected the RBI. What type was it? Was it demand pull? Was it cost push? And this is very interesting again, quite beautiful. Now, आप इंटरेस्ट रेट्स की बात करते हो तो आरबीआई कैन चेंज इंटरेस्ट रेट्स एंड इट कैन सॉर्ट ऑफ कंट्रोल द इकोनॉमी. इंटरेस्ट रेट से डिमांड को कंट्रोल कर सकती है आरबीआई. इंटरेस्ट रेट्स बेसिकली दे वर्क बाय कूलिंग डिमांड. आप बढ़ा दोगे तो थोड़ा सा कम हो जाएगी डिमांड एंड इट कैन मेक बोरोइंग हार्डर. अगर इंटरेस्ट रेट्स आरबीआई बढ़ा देगा तो जो सारे बैंक है उनको ऑटोमेटिकली इंटरेस्ट रेट बढ़ जाएगा और आपको कम मिलेंगे. यू विल गेट लेस लोन, यू विल गेट मोर एक्सपेंसिव EMI. तो आप कम खरीदोगे. And this, of course, is done to control inflation. And this is the right sort of measure when too much money is in the economy. पर एक और टाइप की इन्फ्लेशन होती है. ये तो हो गई डिमांड पुल इन्फ्लेशन. एक होती है कॉस्ट पुश इन्फ्लेशन. दिस इज व्हाट हैपेंड दिस टाइम इन द वॉर. कॉस्ट पुश इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से कॉस्ट पुश इन्फ्लेशन तब होती है जब द इम्पल्स इज ड्रिवन बाय ऑयल प्राइस हाइक. सो if you raise rates at that time, you create a negative outcome. You create a stagflation wali situation where you have not only stagnation, you have inflation as well. Inflation is not because too much money is floating around in the market. Inflation is because महंगाई इसलिए बढ़ गई है because the critical component that is being used to produce much of the economy's goods and is used to run much of the economic machine has gotten expensive. So that is the difference between demand pull and cost push. This one was cost push. Cost push में अगर RBI अपने interest rates बढ़ा देता है तो stagflation की तरफ चली जाएगी economy, which is the impossibility that the RBI was facing. Now you see what I'm talking about? You see the trilemma now? अगर आप interest rates को manage करने की कोशिश करते हो at a time where foreign investors are sitting in India and they are already withdrawing money, तो आप एक बारी रुपी को तो एफर्ट कर दोगे. यू विल सॉर्ट ऑफ बोस्टर द करेंसी एंड यू माइट स्टॉप a little bit of the price, but at the same time you will then lose out on your foreign exchange reserves. I know this is all a little bit confusing, but don't get confused. I will explain. I will link an explainer in the video. I will link an explainer in the description. You can go ahead, watch the explainer. आपको समझ में आ जाएगा how all of these things are connected. The third thing, of course, is the foreign exchange reserves, which act as India's strategic depth. India's reserves roughly are $688 billion. These are the ammunition that the RBI can use to smooth out this volatility without committing to defend any particular rupee level. अब what do you do? Manage float का मतलब RBI foreign exchange reserves खर्च कर सकती है. RBI foreign exchange reserve, जो कि basically is the amount of dollars that India has in its reserve, वो खर्च कर सकती है ताकि रुपये की वैल्यू कम हो जाए, ताकि रुपये की वैल्यू संभली रहे. बट so the forward looking idea, what do you do? How do you But this is, like I told you, a prickly issue. It is not an easy issue to do. It is sounding easy, but what is the way to do it? Special rupee Vostro accounts, and bilateral local currency arrangements. So you talk to, suppose, Russia, or you talk to China and you say, we will not deal with dollar. आप हमारे साथ currency exchange rate अपनी currency का decide करके हमारे साथ trade कर लो. That is something that the United States would never like, but this is one way to do it. So, what are the keywords we just discussed? What are the key concepts that we just discussed? एक तो हमने डिस्कस करा ओपन ये ट्रेलेमा, द इम्पॉसिबल ट्रेलेमा. एन इकोनॉमी कैन होल्ड ओनली मैक्सिमम 2. एक, या आप एक फिक्स्ड मैनेज्ड एक्सचेंज रेट कर सकते हो अपनी करेंसी को प्रोटेक्ट कर सकते हो, या आप फ्री कैपिटल की मोबिलिटी को प्रोटेक्ट कर सकते हो. आप इंडिपेंडेंट मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी इंटरेस्ट रेट्स को कर सकते हो, बट आप तीनों नहीं कर सकते. दिस इज व्हाट द इशू इज. Repo rate we have discussed, which is one of the issues. The repo rate is the rate at which the RBI lends short term to bank against securities. The primary policy rate, SDF, the standard SDF is the standing deposit facility. It is the rate at which banks will park their surplus with RBI, no collateral. And marginal standing facility is this emergency overnight borrowing, the floor and the ceiling of the rate corridor. You will read this in static economics. You should know what is CRR, cash reserve ratio, what is SLR, statutory liquidity ratio. Again, I will put an explainer and I will link it for you so that you understand part by part of what this is. And then the entire picture starts to make a lot more sense. It's not that complicated. यही 5-6 concepts हैं जो आपस में interlinked हैं, और यही 5-6 concepts हैं जो हमको अपनी understanding को challenge भी करते हैं, और we have to demonstrate them when we put it in language, and we'll discuss how to put it in language. We have discussed cost push and demand pull inflation. You might also want to know a little bit about the nominal and real effective exchange rate. Now, the rupee's value against a trade-weighted basket of currencies. Managed float, मैंने आपको बताया. Current account deficit you should know. FPI versus FDI, foreign portfolio investment versus foreign direct investment. We will talk about this in a separate session. Again, these are all the static keywords that you ought to know. And now we come to the fourth theme. We come to the quad. It's interesting that the quad is 4, and in our conversation also it is the fourth theme. What is the central idea here? एक word है जो आपको पता होने की जरूरत है. Minilateralism. Minilateralism. Multilateralism आपने सुना होगा. Minilateralism is a word you should know. Flexible issue-based non-treaty coalitions like the Quad. They can keep functional cooperation alive indefinitely, but at the ministerial level. The problem with the Quad, and this is the core theme, is that अभी तक उसका कोई समिट नहीं हुआ है. इसका मतलब जो लीडर्स हैं कंट्री के, जो क्वाड के लीडर्स हैं, the countries that are surrounding the Pacific Ocean, it was started by Japan, Australia, US, and India. The problem is that the leaders have not met. It is just the ministers that meet. And so even in this instance, it was the foreign ministers that had met. Now, let's go deeper into this and let's understand what really is going on. 20th century में international cooperation has normally ran through very large formal treaty-bound institutions. Take the United Nations, for instance, take NATO, for instance, take the WTO, for instance, and these are legitimate, durable, but they're very slow. They're very rigid. They're very prone to gridlock. Also, they're very prone to hijacking by a powerful player. We have our issues with the WTO. We've had our issues with the United Nations Security Council. Our permanent seat has always been an issue because there's so many players. We don't really have a say. Minilateralism is the deliberate opposite of it. Minilateralism says that it should be a small number of like-minded states. बहुत ही narrow, specific, functional issues पे they should be able to cooperate without a binding treaty, without a secretariat, without binding commitments. This is what the Quad is. That is why the Quad does not have a proper headquarter. India, US, Japan, Australia. This is the archetype of it. And the strength exactly is its weakness also. This is the core theme that you need to understand. The strength is, of course, that it is flexible. It is not cumbersome. Parties can move fast. They can cooperate even faster. The problem is it's informal. It doesn't have a summit. You can so between these countries, you can launch a maritime surveillance initiative, which we will talk about. You can launch a vaccine program very quickly, but because no parliament at home needs to ratify it and the members are not legally bound. We all know, and if you don't know, you should know that Quad ka initial agenda was to counter the posture of China, and The deeper concept for India is holding it without entanglement. India is the chair of Quads in 2024. Now, you might be asked a question on the Quad, and the thing to know about it is the problem that it increases, the problem that it creates for India. Yes, it helps. Yes, it is a good counterweight to China. But at the same time, we don't want American unpredictability looming over our heads also, which is an issue. So the Quad is best understood. It's not just an Asian NATO, which some people call it an Asian NATO, but it's like a flexible insurance policy. And it's a very careful mix to play for us. And in a later theme, we will talk about BRICS. So एक ही महीने में Quad भी हो रहा है, एक ही महीने में BRICS भी हो रहा है, which is actually dominated by China. And this is basically counterweighing China sort of a initiative for these 4 selective countries. So what really is going on? That's what minilateralism is all about. The 11th Quad Foreign Ministers meeting was conducted in New Delhi in May. And what happened in this meeting? First ever Indo-Pacific Maritime Surveillance Collaboration, IPMSC, Indo-Pacific Maritime Surveillance Collaboration. इसका मतलब in the Indo-Pacific region, all Quad members will pool their surveillance and intelligence on the Indian Ocean region, enhancing maritime domain awareness. What else happened in it? Maritime and transnational security agreements, economic security, critical emerging tech, counter-terrorism exercise. A counter-terrorism exercise has been set for Australia, which will be conducted in June 2026. Now, a few keywords you should know: quadrilateral security dialogue. A few keywords you should know: quadrilateral security dialogue, QSD, India, US, Japan, Australia. It was revived in 2017. Quad actually has died once in 2007 when it was proposed by Shinzo Abe, and it has now been revived. The Quad Security Dialogue has been revived in 2017, and it is not a military alliance. There is no secretariat. I already told you the IPMSC, again, this is important, might come. This is an important collaboration that has been announced. Another thing you should know is the IPMDA, the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness. This also I have mentioned, Maritime Domain Awareness. One important keyword that you should know is the Free and Open Indo-Pacific region. Free and Open Indo-Pacific, FOIP. This is the organizing vision of the Quad. Rule-based order, freedom of navigation without coercion, implicitly aimed at Chinese assertiveness in the Indian Ocean region. Critically aimed at that. The South China. There are some groupings like the AUKUS, जिसको Quad के साथ confuse नहीं करना चाहिए. I will just help you clarify what they are. AUKUS is US, UK, Australia, nuclear submarines. The AUKUS is US, UK, Australia. The I2U2 is India, Israel, UAE, and US, like I mentioned. The IPEF is Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, not to be confused with each other. We have already spoken about SAGAR. You should know and you should be able to connect this to the Act East policy, to the Indian Ocean Initiative. We should be able to. We will take a break here and maybe resume this.